Hey there everyone, this is Leo from Tech Lion. I'm going to actually be doing our first ever build video here on this channel, and I'm just showing a bunch of the parts that we're going to be using for a computer that we're going to be building throughout the entirety of this video. This includes the new Intel 12100F processor, an AMD Radeon RX6600, and a Cooler Master NR400 tower that we're going to be putting them all into. This video is also going to kind of double as an unboxing, a full build video from beginning to end. And that's going to start for us with the motherboard, which is going to be the GIGABYTE H610M S2H DDR4 Intel LGA 1700 motherboard. You can see we're just grabbing the motherboard out, along with the I/O shield that we'll need, and the manual with the instructions that are on it to help with any kind of connectivity that we need, usually the pin layout that we have on the motherboard itself. We also actually have a CD that came with it, and that's actually for the drivers, but we don't have a DVD drive or a CD drive in here, so we can kind of get rid of this. Now, I personally like to make a work surface of the actual motherboard box itself, so we'll just keep popping open the motherboard from the anti-static bag that it comes in, kind of present it here on top of the box, so that way we kind of have a nice surface to lay it on. Part of this unboxing, the first thing we're going to install onto the motherboard itself is going to be a pair of 8GB sticks. This is from T-Force, their VULCAN Z 16GB kit for the DDR4 slot that our motherboard uses, running at 3200 megahertz. And we got some stickers here. And we can see right at the side of the motherboard, we have our RAM. Pop these open. And to the side, we can actually get the RAM sticks plugged right on. There's only 2 slots for the RAM itself, so we don't have to worry about any of the 4-slot motherboards that you have to worry about the certain slots. Just pop them right on in there. Next thing that we're going to install into this motherboard is going to be the solid state drive. This is an M.2 stick from Team Group, the MP33 2280 slot M.2 drive, 512 gigs, which is more than enough to install Windows 10 on it and a couple of games, especially if you're running a lot of lower spec games, but a lot of the new ones could eat up the space real easily. Games like Warzone and Fortnite can take this up pretty quickly, but if you want some more space, get a bigger stick. Now, for installing the M.2 drive, we have a single M.2 slot on this specific motherboard with a plastic clip to hold it into place. Most motherboards I've worked on have like a little screw that's on it, but this one, you just pop it in, push it down here, and snap the little plastic clip right on. And now we're getting into some of the beefier components that we're going to be putting into this machine. This is going to be the Intel Core i3-12100F processor that can boost itself up to 4.3 gigahertz. There's the processor right there on the side of the box. And we're also going to get ourselves a nice live first-time unboxing of this generation of processor for me. So we're going to have a little bit of a snafu here and there as I'm going to be unboxing it. But as for this processor itself, it is 4 cores, which sounds a bit low for the 2022 age of processors, but when it comes to gaming performance, those 4 cores are a powerhouse, especially when it comes to the video card that we're going to be pairing it with a bit later. Now we're just going to pop out the included cooler. Most of the time I do recommend replacing the cooler for your processor, but honestly this one's kind of fine, especially for the processor that we're using. You can see the copper piece that's at the bottom and the pre-applied thermal paste. Don't touch that with your finger, of course. Get a little fan to spin just to make sure that everything is good there. And we can get the processor itself out of the box. The main piece that we need that we're going to be putting into the motherboard in just a moment. Back over on the motherboard, we can actually see the area to place the motherboard processor in. We just got to lift this lever up on the side and lift the shield right up. And for a bit of a better angle, we can actually see the pins. Do not touch these. That we can actually put the processor onto. You can see the little arrow on the bottom right side of the screen. We want to make sure that it's facing in this direction, and we just drop it right on top of those pins. And we just move the lever over, press it down here. And once we start getting the lever on, the protective cover will pop right off. We can save that later for RMA purposes. And now it's on. As for getting the fan back on there, the Intel included fans actually comes with these clips that you see here on the side that snap on in when you're actually installing it. So we just have to make sure to simply press it right down, and that'll get them all snapped into every corner. The holes line right up. Get a snap. And I just go kind of in an X direction to snap each and every single corner to make sure they are all in there. And then we need to get the fan itself plugged in. We have the 4-prong pin right next to where the CPU is. This is the CPU fan. We'll just plug that right on in there. And with that, we've essentially finished assembling everything we need on the motherboard itself. We have the solid-state drive, the processor itself, the RAM, and the cooler ready to be installed into the case. So kind of just give it a once-over to make sure everything is in there nice and tight. And let's get this back over to the case. As for the case that we are working with, it's going to be the Cooler Master MasterBox NR400 Micro ATX Tower with some front MECH ventilation. It is a very simple case, has an intake fan, outtake fan included on it, and some mesh at the top as well. And it's got more than enough inputs that we need just to get this nice build going. We're going to start by taking out the side panel. There's a pair of thumb screws on the side. And let's pop the top one off here. Already got rid of the bottom, and the side panel comes right off. And we're also going to get rid of the one on the back of the case itself. Pop that off as well, so we can have some back access. Now that we got the two side panels removed off of the case, I'd like to flip it over onto the side so I can have access to the inside. And of course, before we put the actual motherboard inside, we need to get the I/O shield out. Pop it inside the actual case, inside this large rectangular cutout, and just keep pushing onto it until it pops into place in all the corners. With the I/O shield installed into the case, let's get the motherboard itself. I know, holding it by the fan, but this is fine, trust me. And we'll just have to align it up with the holes of the I/O shield and the little standoffs that are on the case itself until it kind of all just slides right on into place. And now for the only tool that we need for this build, a screwdriver with a Phillips head on it. There are multiple ports here that we need to put some screws into so we could safely and securely screw the motherboard down into the case. I usually install about 5 or 6, but some of the boards require a bit more depending on their size. Get some in each of the corners of the motherboard, 2 at the top, and a couple of more down here over at the bottom. And now for some juice. We have ourselves a 550 watt power supply from EVGA. This is going to be a non-modular power supply. Kind of as a budget build, we don't want to have any fancy extra features like full modularity. I don't find it necessary when it comes to this, but we can keep all these stuff that's outside of this box here. And of course, got the power cable, the actual power supply itself. I have to push this over side. Get this unwrapped down here. Now what I like to do is first unwrap all the cables from these kinds of power supplies and grab the ones that we'll need. We'll need the 24-pin cable for the motherboard itself, the 8-pin cable for the video card that we'll need, and we'll of course also need the 8-pin CPU cable, and we'll just set these aside. This part's a bit optional, but it's something that I personally like to do, especially when it comes to these non-modular cases. I take all the extra cables that we still have that we won't need for this particular build, and I'll just tie them up. I'll just get them all wrapped up over here so that way I can make a nice clean build when I finish putting everything together back into this case. And we're just going to flip the computer back up so we can get some access back over here. You can actually see that there's some room here for a couple of expansions for hard drives if we wish to add any more. But really the reason we need to get back here is that way we can install the power supply with the fan facing downwards so that way it has a proper exhaust. Slide the actual power supply in over here and line up all the 4 holes here so we can get it screwed in properly. Back out with our trusty screwdriver as well. We just get all 4 of the screws screwed in here so that way it's nice and secure. Now for the cables themselves, if you recall, we were tying these up so that way we can have them nice and tidy. I'm actually going to shove them all over into the area here where usually you can put in a hard drive or 2, but since we don't have any hard drives in this build, figure we could just use it for cable storage. And now for the cables that we are using, we're going to start snaking in a 24-pin connector through the front. We'll be snaking in the CPU connector over at the top, and we'll also be snaking in the graphic cards connector over here through the bottom. Now we do have two more connectors that we're going to be snaking in here, one for the HD audio and the other one for the USB 3.0 port that we're going to be using. Now this does depend a lot on both the case and the motherboard that you're using for the type of connectors and where they're going to be snaked through. So we got the audio going in through the bottom right over here, and we got the USB ports going into the same area where the power connector is going for the motherboard. And now we have the fun part of plugging everything into the motherboard itself. I'm actually going to start with the USB 3.0 ports that we have over at the front. It's a simple plug right next to the SATA connectors. Nice and snug. And then afterwards, we're going to have the actual 24-pin connection. This specific power supply requires that we align the 20 pins and the extra 4 pins that are on it, so that way they're kind of held together in place. They snap and lock in. And then push that into the motherboard itself, so that way it fully snaps on. Next, we're also going to grab the 8-pin CPU connectors that are right at the top left corner of the motherboard, and we'll snap those in a very similar sense, right above the actual processor itself. And since I'm already working on the top left corner of the case, I figured I may as well also get the exhaust fan plugged in. You actually like to tie this up into a bit of a semi-knot, so that way the cable itself isn't all hanging out inside the case. Plug it right into the pins. And now what we want to get connected next is the front panel audio connector. There's a single headphone jack that's actually in the front of this case, so we just want to make sure to get that all connected over here. We can see the pin out here in the bottom left corner of the motherboard. It's as simple as simply sliding it on and giving a little bit of a wiggle and a push, and that'll snap right on in there. And now to start connecting up the bottom right area, we're first going to start with the intake fan, because I find it to be the easiest part of what's going to happen in this bottom right corner. And now for what I personally find is going to be the most difficult part of any PC build, and that's getting these pins of the front panel connector all set up. They're rather tiny. I've seen some folks that use a little bit of needle nose pliers to get these done, but I just kind of do it by hand personally. We got the LEDs for the power button to set up, the actual power switch, and a couple of other switches after that. And afterward is going to be definitely one of the most important pieces of this build, the graphics card. We are going to be using the AMD Radeon RX6600 for this build. I find this to be one of the best 1080p gaming graphic cards that we could be using. And of course, one of the main reasons that I chose this specific graphic card for this build is really the price for performance is just there for it. It's a solid piece of work, and it's not really going to completely kill the bank. Let's get this open here, get the driver package out, and there she is. Dual fan design, easy to use, very aesthetic for this build as well. Over towards the sides, we've got the nice little MECH logo, the Radeon. We got the 8-pin connector that we want to see over here. And what I do want to check out over here is the back of it, where we got a nice solid plate. Got that nice dragon shield logo there to work with. As you can see in the back, I've already removed the two covers that I need for the graphic card. But let's just get this plugged in over here. We just got to line it up with the PCI Express slot. Push it on in. And you'll hear it click into place. And now we just got to get it screwed down. And of course, the final connector that we need in this entire setup is going to be the PCI Express port that you see over here, the 8-pin connector for this specific card. Fortunately, this one only needs one. Some more powerful graphic cards out there may need 2 or even 3, but this one, nice, simple 1080p graphic card, doesn't need way too much power. Just tuck the cable away in there. And of course, the moment of truth. Look at that. Power on the first try. That's exactly what we want to see happening on your very first try. And of course, now that we're in the BIOS, we do just double check to make sure that everything is working. We see that the CPU temps are fine. We see that the 12100F is detected. And we are just going to enable XMP here so that way we can have the full utilization of the RAM itself. It's clocking at a 2400 out of the box. We just want to make sure that we're getting the full 3200 megahertz that we are paying for. And there it is. All right, and with that, the build is complete. We just want to make sure to seal this up, making sure it looks all nice and pretty. I want to thank everybody for kind of sitting through this video, this nice build process that we have here. We're just going to get this all packed up and shipped out to a customer right away. Until next time.